I'm just gonna stop this share. Hi everyone, my name is Danny Lugassi, he, him. I'm a organizer with the Green Party of New York and a Green Party member for over 10, 12 years now. I'm excited to be hosting this event with three amazing speakers. So we are here for Climate Crisis. We're getting New York updates and actions. So many of you are probably aware that there is a lot happening around the move towards the New York State budget. But regardless of that, there are bigger pictures that are threatening the climate of New York State emergently right now. So you are going to hear from three amazing speakers, Mark Dunlea, Ann Rabe, and Eric Weltman. I'm going to introduce each one of them. They're each going to speak for about 12, 15 minutes. I'm going to ask you to put questions in the chat. I'm going to collect the questions and comments that you have for each of the speakers. And then when they're done in about 45 minutes from now, we are going to have this amazing panel with the three of them. And I'm going to be feeding those questions to them so that they can kind of focus on what they're presenting. So I'm going to start with Mark Dunlea, who's the chair of the Green Education and Legal Fund. He's actually a co-founder of the Green Party of New York. Mark, as you know, if anybody in New York State, has been really an amazing longtime advocate. I've known Mark since I've gotten involved with advocacy in New York State and the Green Party since the Occupy movement. He's been a radio and news producer with the Sanctuary for Independent Media for 20 years as an hour-long weekly show about what's happening on Capitol Hill. He's got an amazing book that I'm so glad I was going to drop in the chat later on, putting out The Planetary Fire. And you can go to the Green and Education Legal Fund on that website, and I'll drop that again later for folks, Mark. Without further ado, Mark is going to talk to us about what's been happening around different climate bills and legal action and many of the things that Hochul and her administration have been attacking and rolling back. So, Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Danny. I'll just mention I recently had some minor surgery, so I have a bit of a black eye. And, we are certainly going to primarily focus on what's going on at the state level. But, unfortunately, global warming is a global problem. And we're part of a broader picture. And unfortunately, we're really losing the fight on climate action, both at the state level, national level, and the international level. There is some positive news, mainly that the reality is that renewable energy is increasingly by far the cheapest form of electricity. And so despite what our politicians may want to do, increasingly the market moves in the direction of putting more renewable energy online. And Bill McKibben recently put out a book about the sun, and one of the points he made was in Pakistan, about 30% of that country's electricity in about a 5-year period of time is now coming from solar, and that is because they border China, and because the reliability of solar in Pakistan was so volatile and the price was so high that many people just unilaterally, without any government help, went across the border and bought cheap solar panels from China, and has dramatically changed the situation with renewable energy in Pakistan in a very short period of time. Unfortunately, greenhouse emissions continue to globally increase. In the United States, we had, for about 2 years, we were actually seeing some reduction in progress in terms of the level. That unfortunately has changed in the last year. We're seeing about a 2.4% increase in 2005. And I know Eric will be talking more about this, but a lot of that is because of the rapidly expanding artificial intelligent data center industry and cryptocurrency. And emissions tied to the power sector has risen by an estimated 3.8% in 2025. And last year's colder than average winter months, at least in the Northeast, also increases demand for heating buildings, pushing up emissions by 6.8% compared with 2024. New York has seen overall a 15% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990. However, that was quite a bit short of the 40% goal by 2030. That was part of the CLCPA, and the governor, unfortunately, has really prevailed on that. I will note that the Green Party, along with Food and Water Watch, had developed a much more stronger bill on climate than what was adopted, the CLCPA. The CLCPA, unfortunately, primarily incorporated the goals that were done in 1990, in 2009, via an executive order by the governor. And 10 years later, they basically put a lot of those standards into the legislation. People like Food and Water Watch, Green Party, actually 200 different groups. And somebody maybe Nydia needs to shut off your audio so we don't get background noise. And we said that we really needed, when the state did a climate law, I guess back in 2019, that it should have reflected a lot of the agreements that were made in Paris, particularly trying to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade. Unfortunately, they went largely with the 2009 targets, part of the argument being that Governor Cuomo was more likely to sign the bill if it, in fact, just put into law what was already the policy of the state, and what a lot of climate groups primarily focus upon was trying to add labor standards, which the Governor Cuomo removed, and then also, quite rightfully, trying to ensure that more money would be put into dealing with environmental justice. That did make it in. Unfortunately, it only limited to new climate funding. And since there's been no new climate funding, basically, environmental justice groups have seen very little money so far. So as we sit here 7 weeks after the so-called April 1st deadline for the state budget, we still do not have one. Over the last 2 weeks, information has leaked out. They have allegedly come to an agreement as to what they're going to do on the climate law. This was a horrible, horrible process. Governor Hochul did not include any changes to the climate law in her initial budget proposal, nor did she do it in a 30-day budget amendment. And even when in the last days before the April 1st deadline, she basically wrote vague op-eds that outlined what she was doing to cut the law, rather than ever putting in writing what she was trying to do. But what we understand is not good at all. One of the things is she had lost a lawsuit. The CLCPA had required, I think it was 2024, that the state issue regulations on how it intended to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Contrary to a lot of people think, it did not require the governor to put out regulations on how to implement carbon pricings. What she has done is she has pushed back that deadline back to 2028 in terms of having to issue regulations on how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. She basically has gotten rid of the 40% reduction target in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Instead, a more vague goal of trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 60% by 2040. Little policy wonky. but she also changed on how we count greenhouse gas emissions. Mainly this dealt with um, how do we account for methane? Methane from natural gas, it's like 80 times more potent as a greenhouse gas emission than carbon emissions. But its potency, particularly, is most important during its first 20 years, and which it enters the atmosphere. And so our state was reflecting that fact. She has gone apparently to use a 100-year standard rather than a 20-year standard. Um, and I believe she also is not taking into account greenhouse gas emissions that come from imported. We stopped, for instance, fracking of gas here in New York State. Food and Water Watch did a lot of bird dogging of Governor Cuomo, ran him crazy. People, especially in the southern tier, passed laws at the town and village level to make fracking illegal. And our buddy Howie Hawkins got 5% of the vote for governor, kept Cuomo from getting the percentage that his father got, which really got him upset. And so after that election in 2015, he agreed to ban fracking in New York, but did not ban the importation of fracking. We still do keep the 2050 mandate, but that's only an 85% reduction, basically net zero by 2050. And that is just one of many bad things that she has been doing. She paused implementation. One of the few victories we've gotten since the CLCPA was passed was the All Electric Buildings Act. And earlier this year, any new building, I believe 6 stories or lower, had to be all electric. And even though when the developer sued, the court ruled that the law was legal, Governor Hochul decided while that is being appealed, even though we won the state, that she would halt the implementation of the All Electric Buildings Act until that lawsuit is settled, which will be for quite a few years. Several years ago, people did pass the Build Public Renewables Act. Not as strong as many of us wanted, but a step in the right direction. Unfortunately, it left a lot of discretion up to the New York Power Authority. And while a lot of the advocacy groups have been pushing for a goal of 15 gigawatts of public power, she's more in the 5 gigawatts of public power. Under the CLCPA, the state was supposed to get 70% of its renewable energy, of its electricity from renewable energy by 2030. That was starting with a base of about 25%, mainly coming from hydroelectric, and maybe about 3 or 4% coming from wind and solar. The state has made very, very little, progress with respect to that particular rule, which is one of the reasons we passed the Build Public Renewables Act, was so that in case the private sector, was not able to meet that goal, then New York Power Authority, which is a publicly owned authority, would step in, and the governor has been sort of slow walking that. Danny, how much time do I have left?
You're good for another 5 minutes, Mark. Yeah.
About another 5 minutes. Okay. There are a bunch of bills that people still hope to get into. Eric, I'm sure, will be talking about the data center moratorium, and we'll be talking about a moratorium on nuclear power. There's a couple of bills. Maybe some of them might get into the into the state budget. The SUNY Act would basically legalize what's called plug-in balcony solar, which is legal in Utah of all places, very popular in Europe. Basically, you can go down to Home Depot or, whatever your favorite multinational, company is, and buy solar panels and put it on your deck or balcony and just plug it into the wall and basically run solar. And this would make it legal in New York State, including, I believe, allowing you to run the thing back. And also it's called the as soon as possible ASAP Act, which is basically to, uh, the state actually, the one part of the climate law where the state was actually meeting its goals was in basically rooftop solar, distributed solar. And so, of course, because the state was meeting its goal, it said, well, let's slow down with the part we're doing well. And people are saying, maybe instead of slowing down what we're doing well, we should increase the goals and keep on pushing that forward. And that's what the ASAP Act would do. One of the things that's come out in the last couple of days, may have read about New York Post, not Governor, I get confused between Governor Hochul and that other guy, the president. What is his name again? Well, we'll remember him. But in any case, this young man has been celebrating recently because basically the IPCC has come out and said the worst case scenario for global warming, Mr. Trump, in the next century is not likely to occur, and that's sort of good news. Partly not occurring because we're doing better with renewable energy, but it also means that the best case scenario, which is trying to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees, is also not occurring. So he is saying that this means that climate change has been a hoax. This is all false, and publications like the New York Post are jumping on that. Believe it or not, that is not what the IPCC is saying. They're just saying it's unlikely that we're going to have global warming by 2100 that hits the 5 degrees Celsius mark, which is good news. More likely, we're going to hit the 3.5 degrees Celsius mark, which is really bad news, and we may hit 4.5 degrees Celsius. Even at our present 1.5 degrees, we're seeing a rapid increase in extreme weather, wildfires in Canada hurting air quality here in New York State. If we get to 3.2 degrees Celsius, not only will we be seeing extreme heat waves increasing, but parts of the world like the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and even parts of the United States would have months each year which the heat would be unsurvivable. People could not go outside. It also would mean that melting ice and the sea level would rise, and the planet would face a potential tipping point of irreversible melting for the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheets. Biodiversity would continue to increase. Ecosystems will be decimated. Already we've broke through 7 of the 9 life boundaries on the planet. And we would expect a widespread drought, shift in participation patterns, increase in compromise of global agriculture, and food scarcity and shortages of fresh drinking water. So we're not going to have the most catastrophic, unlikely, but we are likely going to have catastrophic, climate change. So I assume you're probably not paying attention to the New York Post and to, Mr. Trump, but that has been getting a lot of play in the media in the last couple of days. It is terrible what Governor Hochul has done, and unfortunately, she's not the only Democratic governor that's doing it across the country. We're seeing more and more, as Biden and Obama did, embracing the concept of all the above energy strategy, which particularly means natural gas. Natural gas remains the single largest source of electricity in New York State. Increasingly, as Ann Rabe will be talking about, governors like Hochul are promoting nuclear power despite its incredible expense and its various environmental issues. And what we're really lacking is leadership. And Hochul likes to say, well, the world has changed since the law was passed because now Trump is president. Well, Trump was president when the CLCPA was adopted. We knew we had problems at the federal level, and that's one of the reasons we adopted state bills was that New York needed to step up to the plate. And unfortunately, Governor Hochul has been going in the opposite direction. And while we need to blame Governor Hochul, it's also bad that the state legislature went along with that. And so I'm going to end at that point, and I'm not sure whether Ann or Eric goes next, but I'll pass it back to Tony.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was great. I'm going to hold questions I have for you, and I know others do. It's quite frankly overwhelming and confusing, and I think there are so many different things that are happening around climate. So I really, really appreciate that. So we're going to move to Eric Weltman, who is a senior organizer for Food and Water Watch in New York. If you haven't heard of Food and Water Watch, I'm going to drop their link in the chat. They're an amazing organization with millions of members. They're doing stuff all around the country, including heavy organizing in New York State. They're an amazing organization that is obviously fighting for climate justice, ending kind of corporate overreach into our climate. Eric Weltman has been an organizer for 25 plus years, social justice campaigns, building progressive power. Again, if you've been out in any spaces fighting for climate justice in Albany or in your local counties, you've probably seen Eric. Maybe you didn't even notice. You were standing right beside him or hearing him speak. He's done multiple trainings for media outreach advocacy and has also really published extensively. So Eric, it's really a pleasure to have you. Eric is going to be talking about data centers. I know it's really just on the top of mind. It's constantly in the news cycle. So we're excited to hear about what's happening. What are these data centers? Why we need to push back on them, and what's going on in New York.
Absolutely. Let's go.
Thank you.
The first thing I want to say is organizing is all about the relationships, and the relationships that we have with folks like Mark, Ann, I see Nydia there, my friend Nydia Leaf, who I admire so much, Jim Brown. The relationships that we have with you folks are absolutely gold. And anything, and I mean this, anything that we've accomplished has only been with the support of amazing activists and allies like you folks. So the other thing I want to say is, notwithstanding all the justifiably grim news that Mark shared about our horrendous governor, we are on the cusp of a potential victory in the fight against data centers, and specifically on the cusp of potentially passing a moratorium on data centers. So what are the known risks and harms of data centers? Why should New York look before we leap? I'm going to briefly touch upon 4 concerns, and then I want to talk about action steps because that's the real exciting stuff. But 4 concerns: their enormous energy footprint, providing a lifeline for fossil fuels, skyrocketing electricity costs, and drained water resources. A lot of this information I'm about to convey is available online. Food and Water Watch has abundance of resources on our website. I'm putting a link in the chat to a 6-page fact sheet, heavily footnoted, that you're welcome to look at. So data centers consume a mind-boggling amount of electricity. I'm going to reel out some stats here. In 2020, data centers around the world consumed the amount of electricity used by over 21 million U.S. households. Even so, the International Energy Agency predicts that global energy use will triple from 2020 to by 2030, thanks to developments in AI and cryptocurrency. In the United States alone, annual data center energy demand could constitute 12% of national demand by 2028. That's equivalent to the energy used by over 55 million U.S. households. AI technology in particular consumes an incredible amount of energy in every step. For example, simple text searches on ChatGPT use nearly 10 times as much electricity as a non-AI Google search. And where does all this energy come from? Largely from dirty energy sources. Data centers are extending the life of oil, gas, and coal power plants that were scheduled to be retired. Big tech is reviving nuclear power plants, including 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania, and data centers rely on backup generators, and lots of them, including highly polluting ones fueled by diesel. And that voracious appetite for energy comes at a cost to ratepayers like us. Utilities often compete to attract data centers while raising the rates for captive residential customers. U.S. electric and gas utilities requested $31 billion in rate increases in 2025, double what they requested in 2024. Average residential electricity prices in the U.S. soared 31% from 2020 to 2025, compared to just 4% from 2015 to 2020. The demand for energy and related infrastructure costs associated with AI are linked to these skyrocketing energy prices. And finally, data centers are endangering our water supplies. Data centers use massive amounts of water for cooling their servers, which run super hot. We estimate by 2028, U.S. data center needs just for cooling could be as high as the indoor needs of 18.5 million U.S. households. And please note, nearly 3/4 of a data center's water use is associated with producing the electricity it needs. All this and more, gobbling up of farmland, lots of noise, very few permanent jobs, massive government subsidies, huge amounts of electronic waste, the risk of a massive boom and bust, and of course, all the social harms stemming from AI. So, as I said at the outset, we are on the cusp of potentially passing a moratorium on data centers in New York by June 4th, the end of the legislative session. This is a bill that was introduced by Assemblymember Anna Kellis, and Senators Kruger and Gonzalez just a few months ago. And in the past few months, we've accomplished some amazing things. Over 150 organizations have signed on in support, ranging from the NAACP and the League of Women Voters to the Sierra Club and the New York State Council of Churches. Over 500 businesses have signed a letter that we're releasing on Thursday supporting a moratorium. And we have a growing number of co-sponsors, 34 in the Assembly and 19 in the Senate. I'm going to put links to the bill in the chat. You can see who's on the bill and you can see who's not. And perhaps most significantly, last Wednesday, we held an immensely successful rally and lobby day in Albany with over 100 people at the $1 Million Staircase. I know Mark was there. We had some incredible speakers, the bill sponsors, the executive director of the League of Women Voters, a local elected official, activists fighting data centers in their communities. We had 52 lobby visits. It was a jam-packed day. I'm including in the chat a link to the press release that we issued, as well as a wonderful news story that came out. Okay, so now we come to the fun stuff, the good stuff. What are the next steps? So again, here's the good news. We can pass this bill in the next few weeks. In fact, we have to. We've got some incredible champions in the legislature. We've got wonderful allies, highly committed allies, and lots of them. We've got momentum, and we've got a cause with widespread support across the political spectrum. In fact, I'll share a poll that shows what we already really know. It's a recent Gallup poll that shows that Americans really don't like data centers. So I'm putting a link to that Gallup poll in the chat. But we've got a lot of work to do in the weeks ahead, and I'm going to share six actions that we invite you to join us for. First, we're going back to Albany again next week, Thursday, May 28th, for what we call a mini lobby day. Nothing's fancy, no rallies, no buses. We're renting a van from the city, but for the most part, we're asking people to travel there on their own. And in true lobbying fashion, we're going to be walking the corridors of the Capitol, visiting offices, and talking with legislators and their staff. And we may even spend some time hanging out in the lobby, and maybe we'll see one of my favorite activists, Judith Enck, who's up there, I think probably just about every day, lobbying on this overdue plastics bill. So if you're interested and available, I put a link in the chat to the registration form for joining us in Albany on Thursday, May 28th. That's a week from this Thursday. Second, we are holding what we call an in-district office blitz. These are daytime visits to legislative offices back home in their districts. Some of you may have participated in a similar tactic recently around defending the climate law. The good news is when you're visiting in-district offices, you don't need a lot of people. 2 or 3 will suffice to make an impression. And I'm putting a link in the chat to a spreadsheet. If you are available to participate in, or bottom line, a quick little visit to your own assembly member or senator, please fill out this form that I'm putting in the chat. And again, these are visits that you can, schedule around your own availability. The next 2 activities are events in support of what we local site fights. We are lending our support to battles against data centers in various communities that really epitomize why we need this moratorium. So there's an event this Thursday evening in 2 days in Hopewell Junction in Dutchess County where there's a proposed data center, and I'll put the link to that in the chat. If you're interested and available, please join us this Thursday evening in Hopewell Junction. And then on Wednesday, May 27th in Orangeburg in Rockland County, we're joining local activists at a planning board meeting. Again, this is in Rockland County, another link in the chat. We are going to also be doing some phone banking with our friends at New York City DSA. That's TBD. So we'll send some information about when those phone banks are scheduled. And finally, sixth and finally, we have an online action, and we encourage people to click on the link to send a quick and easy message to your own legislators. And also, we request that you share this action. Share this action with at least 5 people, if not more. That's an important, means by which we, grow our impact and grow our movement. So, 6 ways to take action, get involved, and help pass this extraordinarily important bill by June 4th. We can do it, folks. We can do it. We can do it. We can win. We can win. So appreciate your support.
Amazing. Thank you, Eric. And all of those links that Eric is dropping in the chat, I'm actually going to come back to in a moment and highlight them. And also, all of this stuff is going to be emailed out to folks who are here today and also folks who could not make it. Obviously, our network is wide and not everyone can jump on live. So really, really appreciate it. I've got lots of questions already in my mind for both Mark and Eric, but we are going to turn to Anne Rabe, and I'm just going to pin you a moment here. So, right. So Anne Rabe is joining us from the Alliance for Nuclear Free New York. Again, many folks have either heard or been in different meetings, whether Green Party or other climate justice activists have heard Anne for many, many years so passionately about this issue. What we're hearing, and I don't know if you recognize this, but just a few years ago, or less than that, Governor Hochul has mandated that New York State now build a brand new nuclear power plant, when essentially many of us thought that nuclear was done for in New York State. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Anne. And again, I have actions and stuff and links that I'm going to show after folks have the panel discussion. So, Anne, take it away.
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation. And basically, what we're fighting is Governor Hochul's fast-tracking proposals for 5 new, large, conventional nuclear reactors. Possibly some small modular reactors in the mix, but we don't know for sure. But in her January State of the State, she proposed, outside of any legislative process, all administratively, she is pursuing aggressively with the Public Service Commission, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and the New York Power Authority to site and build, either in a public and private partnership or public only, 5 conventional nuclear reactors, more than any other state has ever considered. Usually it's 2 or 1. She's going for 5. So let me just share the screen here and give you some high points on our Nuclear Ratepayer Protection Nuclear Moratorium Act that we are seeking to pass this session. So the Ratepayer Protection Nuclear Moratorium Act is basically a 2.5-year pause on funding of new reactors by ratepayers and taxpayers, so a legislative task force can have independent experts assess the financial, environmental, safety, and health aspects of nuclear energy. Compare them to renewable energy with full public participation. Let's look before we leap. Let's not be fooled again. It's Senate Energy Committee Chair Kevin Parker is the prime sponsor in the Senate, and Assembly Mental Health Committee Chair Joanne Simon is the sponsor in the Assembly. Just want to start a snapshot for those who aren't aware of New York's long history with nuclear power plants. We have 7 reactors. 3 are closed, the Indian Point reactors in Westchester County, and 4 are still operating, and recently got, a couple months ago, approval from the Public Service Commission, and it was their idea, to continue up to $33 billion in ratepayer subsidies for these 4 old reactors. The Ginna plant in Wayne County near Rochester, and the Fitzpatrick 9 Mile Unit 2 and Unit 1 in Oswego County north of Syracuse. And so those 4 aged reactors, which were built for 40 years, are going to go out to 2049, 60, 70 years, and get $33 billion in ratepayer subsidies. Nuclear can't exist without government subsidies. And from 1959, when Governor Nelson Rockefeller created the Office of New York Atomic Development, the precursor to NYSERDA, and advocated for the Indian Point reactor 24 miles north of New York City. Since then to today, there has never been an evidence-based assessment of the economic impact. Is it affordable? The liability risks to the state, meltdowns, accident risks, long-lived radioactive waste, releases to nearby communities, and the health impacts. So we'll just take a quick look at those, which underscore the need for this legislative task force to conduct this independent assessment. Here's a snapshot of where those reactors are. And again, the 3 nuclear power plants, Indian Point 1, 2, and 3 in Westchester County, were shut down in last one was shut down in 2021. The first thing that's never included in the cost calculation of nuclear energy is the high-level reductive waste that it creates. And that basically is 5,000 metric tons have been created by these 7 reactors, high-level waste, 5 million a year for on-site storage in each reactor. There's nowhere to take it. There's no federal repository. And this is long-lived. Uranium-235, enriched uranium, 50% of its radioactivity will decay in 700 million years. You just can't imagine this. And unlike solar and wind power, nuclear energy always creates high-level reductive waste. So we just take a look at, 500 years of 35 million a year for the existing waste we have to take care of. $17.5 billion. It's just mind-boggling why nuclear energy continues to be considered. And then we look at landmark studies by Harvard School of Public Health in the last 8 months. First ever been done in the world. They tested indoor dust in homes and soil and yards next to a closed reactor in Massachusetts, and they found the indoor dust where babies are touching the indoor dust in the soil, children are touching it, who are 20 times more sensitive to toxic chemicals, polluted with enriched uranium, cobalt 90, etc. Then they went and looked at the people and the 7 Massachusetts reactor communities. And they found significantly increased cancer incidence of radiation-related cancers like lung cancer, with the risk declining 18 miles away from those reactors. Very statistically significant. Then they went and looked at about 100 reactor communities in America and compared them to non-reactor communities. And they found statistically significant increases in cancer mortality. These are huge red flags. And so we are working with Dr. Petros Koutrakis at the Harvard School of Public Health. He's interested in doing many more studies. He's doing one right now on plants contamination and wildlife, but he's interested in doing many more in-depth studies, epidemiological studies, health studies, in terms of the reactor communities, who in many cases have been exposed to radionuclides for decades. The third problem with nuclear energy, and the reason we need this pause, is that back when they started in the 1950s, they were so unsafe as a technology that insurance companies refused to insure them. So Congress had to pass the Price-Anderson Act to cap the liability and the cleanup costs, et cetera, that the insurance would provide. Massive pollution, thousands of families relocated permanently, major increases in cancer and leukemia at the 3 nuclear meltdowns we've already seen, or accidents: 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. So let's just look at what that cap means. It caps the insurance liability cost per reactor at $66 million. Peanuts. You look at Fukushima. So far, they're spending $213 billion per reactor, and they're still cleaning it up. So who pays the gap of $12.3 billion? You and I. The next problem, of course, is safety and the risks. Last year, before Trump administration gutted the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, eviscerated to a large degree their safety standards and their environmental review process in the last 6 months. Even before that, when they were looking at how the Department of Energy in the Trump administration was basically running the show at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, very much politicizing that already weak regulatory commission. A coalition of nuclear engineers and former government industry officials wrote an op-ed in Scientific American saying that what is happening, this regulatory capture of the NRC by Trump and the pro-nuclear industry, will severely increase the risk of expensive, unexpected nuclear accidents in the U.S. So if these five reactors, if one of them goes forward, the problem is the NRC under federal law has total jurisdiction on safety, on cleanup, and on the design of the reactor, and on the operation of the reactor in New York State. The DEC, the Department of Health, the state has no jurisdiction except offsite. So it's all up to this eviscerated NRC if, God forbid, one of those reactors goes forward. 2 years ago, we were contacted by some whistleblowers at NYSERDA. And they had done, at the behest of Governor Hochul, an internal review and financial assessment of advanced nuclear energy, new nuclear energy. Astronomical cost to ratepayers and taxpayers, enormous liability risk to the state. The recommendation of those staff in the report that was given to Governor Hochul in 2024 was, do not pursue it. It's fiscally irresponsible. She said, we're pursuing it,
Patient
find
care.
the money. And so
As we
NYSERDA
delve deeper,
used some
reflect on the
leftover,
ways
use some leftover federal grant money to start pursuing nuclear reactors. And 2 other consultant reports found similar results in terms of the expense alone is astronomical. Back in 2022, the Climate Action Council, which had industry representatives and had many state agency representatives, they reached consensus on this recommendation that nuclear should not play a major role. And before we even consider new nuclear, we need to do a rigorous scrutiny of its expenses, its health, its safety, and its environmental impacts. Never been done. This is why we need the Nuclear Moratorium Act. We just got 3 days ago through a FOIL request, we received from New York Public Authority, the Boston Consulting Group's proposal from last summer for the Advanced Nuclear Project Development, the stakeholder process for NYPA's new reactor, which the governor ordered NYPA to build it last June. And amazing report. Number one, it's half the pages are blacked out, redacted. Number two, this sentence here, the first sentence here, nuclear development projects face unique risks. They require large upfront capital investment and $10 billion plus, and face high uncertainty on total cost and schedule. 100% plus capital cost overruns are common on recent nuclear builds. We know this because of Vogtle. The only 2 reactors built in America in the last 30 years are the Vogtle reactors in Georgia. They cost $38.6 billion, basically roughly taking into account New York State's higher labor costs, et cetera, roughly $20 billion a reactor. So it's $100 billion the governor's looking at, 5 times $20 billion. And when those reactors went online in 2024, 25% utility rate increases locked in for the next 60 years to pay for the reactors, plus $1,000 per household was spent to prop up the construction costs of building those reactors. And so what happened is last November, for the first time ever, the Georgians voted out of office 2 Republican public service commissioners. They elect their public service commissioners, and one recently resigned. They basically, was major sticker shock, and people were had to choose between buying food and paying their utility bills. Similarly, in South Carolina, where they walked away after Westinghouse went bankrupt, they walked away from a similar reactor, 2 reactors, the summer plants, after paying off $9 billion. And this is akin to our famous New York State example, which is the Shoreham reactor on Long Island. Over 40 years ago, for those of you who remember, the Shoreham reactor never went online, never operated, but it cost the ratepayers 37% ratepayer increases. Commercial customers paid $10,000 extra from 93 to 95, according to a controller audit. And here's the sad news. The Long Island ratepayers are still paying off the Shoreham reactor that never provided a kilowatt of energy. So, I mean, there's so much evidence on why we need to have this independent assessment done. John Howard, former public service commissioner, said that NYPA, when they owned 2 nuclear plants, 9 Mile 2 and another one, they were labeled among the worst operators of nuclear plants in the nation by the NRC. And they also allowed both 9 Mile 2 and Shoreham to be 1,200% over budget. So this is who the governor's appointed to build the first reactor. And as John Howard said, this is one area where being first in the nation, being the first state in the nation, is not the best idea. I mean, it will take a miracle to have an affordable, safe, clean nuclear reactor. We hired Dr. Joseph Rome, who's a national expert and former Department of Energy official, and he looked at our state energy plan last fall, and he looked at NYSERDA's 0 by 2040 techno-economic report. Zero analysis of the costs and the safety and the environmental impacts of new nuclear reactors. Zero analysis. That's why we need the Nuclear Moratorium Act. And then we look at around the world. I mean, every week there's another report or study or Exxon CEO saying basically what oilprice.com said 3 months ago. The prospects for new nuclear, both big conventional reactors and small modular reactors, are deader than the proverbial doornail. They are just unaffordable and unsafe. They also steal from renewable energy. Last year, Governor Hochul cut solar energy by $200 million. And here she is this year, administratively pursuing $100 billion of nuclear energy with no analysis, no assessment. So that's, it's because of Governor Hochul and Governor Cuomo's lack of action on funding and investing in the transition to renewable energy and having annual benchmarks requiring this be done. That's why we're falling behind in meeting climate act goals. And what she's doing, she's putting all her eggs in the nuclear basket. So here's another one that came 2 months ago from Wood Mackenzie, a nationally known energy firm. Small modular reactors, just economies of scales, are just extraordinarily expensive, then conventional, then natural gas, and then reasonable, affordable energy is offshore wind, combined solar and batteries, and utility scale solar. This is also from the Alliance for Clean Energy, similar results, and basically a very telling statistic. Since 2009, the cost of utility scale solar power has dropped 84%, and nuclear has risen 47%. Why would we even consider a new reactor? And this is other statistics here in terms of renewables are here today. You can build a wind project in 12 months, a storage facility in 15, a solar project in 18 months. It takes typically 15 plus years to build a nuclear reactor. It's not going to help us with the 2030 or the 2040 goals. And it's going to be just, major sticker shock. Last year, the investors, the banks, et cetera, who don't invest in nuclear exists because of government subsidies. Last year, 93% of the energy, utility scale energy, electric generating capacity investments were solar, wind, and battery storage. 93%. Batteries costs have gone down 40% in the last year and a half. So it's just, basically bizarre that the governor is pursuing this. Our two key actions, we have 3 weeks. We have, an Assembly and a Senate bill. We have met with over 55 senators and Assembly members in the last 2 months. We've been aided by some really great national energy and economic experts, and advocates have come up from Georgia, 2 of them, Georgians for Affordable Energy, Patty Durand and Kim Scott from Georgia One, a women's group, saying, learn from Georgia, learn from what we did in the last 30 years. Do not do new nuclear, do the Moratorium Act. So we are hoping to get, a lot of co-sponsors in the next 2 weeks in the Assembly and the Senate bill. They're pending in the Energy Committee, and we are going to do everything we can 24/7 to pass these bills because God forbid this happens. This summer, NYPA puts out a 30-year bond locking all of New Yorkers, all New York ratepayers into paying for their proposed reactor. They could do it. Administratively, they could do it. The legislature has to step up to the plate. The governor's off the rails. Fiscal accountability, environmental justice accountability. We need to pass the Nuclear Ratepayer Protection Nuclear Moratorium Act. So please come to our website, sign the petition, download our posters and fact sheets, check out our forum videos with national experts. We're having a news conference next Tuesday, 11 a.m., a Zoom news conference with Senator Kevin Parker, the Senate Energy Committee chair sponsor, and Assemblywoman Joanne Simon, and the former Nuclear Regulatory Commission chair, Gregory Yaxo, who comes from Albany. He went to grade school with Roger Downs at the Sierra Club, I learned today. And Gregory Yaxo, under Obama, was the NRC chair. He was the chair during Fukushima, and he tried to install improvements in safety standards, and he lost. So he wrote a book. He has, because of safety and economics, he is strongly opposed to nuclear, and he's going to be speaking at that Zoom news conference next Tuesday at 11. And please, contact me. The bottom is my email and phone number. Join some Zoom meetings. We're having them every single day with legislators. Take action, help us make calls to get co-sponsors. We have low-hanging fruit. We have many legislators that are primed to become co-sponsors now that we have an Assembly Senate bill. And we need to build a big tent. So please consider having your group do a memo of support. We can send you a template, and joining the Alliance for Nuclear Free New York. Thanks a lot.
Wow. Thank you, Anne. And I've collected some questions already. I'm going to be bringing up Eric and Mark so I can pin folks. So this is to pick your brains, the three of you. So let me just bring Mark back up here.
Oh, and Danny, I should mention
Yeah,
that,
please.
of course, the nuclear, the governor, the PSC, et cetera, they're all using the excessive energy hogs, the data centers, as an excuse for nuclear. And,
Yeah.
obviously it's ridiculous.
So I might go there first. It's kind of my question. We'll start with nuclear, and I'm gonna, in a moment after this panel, I have many of the things you folks have shared in the chat, and show even if folks want to do some QR code signing some of these actions and petitions right now. And I've got to ask, and this is a general question, and then we're gonna maybe ask about the more specific nuclear questions. It's almost like a sociological question culturally. How did nuclear just become so popular? So in thinking about this in the last few weeks and knowing you were going to speak to us, just doing some internet searching, there is just hundreds of influencers and folks popping up, with the message that, hey, fossil fuels are really bad and damaging the environment, and we all need to go nuclear. Maybe if you could just speak for a moment, what happened there? How did it almost go completely out of vogue into something that's a kind of hot item that almost seems to be confusing left and right folks? Any thoughts, big picture, on what happened here?
Sure, big picture. And then we have, from the whistleblowers at NYSERDA, the New York picture on why Governor Hochul drank the Kool-Aid.
Yep.
Big picture is that the nuclear industry and the fossil fuel industry are like this. And, the fossil fuel industry and the nuclear industry saw this opportunity with all these climate laws passing to basically continue fossil fuel as the bridge and bring in a next nuclear renaissance of new nuclear reactors, because we need to have replacement for fossil fuel. So that's what President Trump and Governor Hochul have both done, is eviscerate renewable energy program investments and put lots of money into nuclear. The reason Kathy Hochul, from the whistleblowers stories, the reason Kathy Hochul in 2024 embraced nuclear, 3 reasons. The Wall Street banks, the five top Wall Street banks, apparently went to the governor's staff and said, we perceive with AI, we're going to need double the energy in the next 10 years, and we want it to be nuclear. Now, these are the banks that will not invest in nuclear, but they wanted the governor and the taxpayers and ratepayers to take it on. Secondly, Micron, which is building a humongous computer chip facility in Syracuse, supposedly threatened the governor's staff, saying, if you don't let us build a reactor at the Oswego County 3-reactor complex, if you don't let us build a new reactor, we will build a natural gas plant on our property. Third thing we understand from the whistleblowers is that the Biden administration, which was also pro-nuclear, contacted the governor's staff in 2024 and said, we have beaucoup grants to give you if you want to pursue advanced nuclear, because the nuclear industry effectively lobbied both the Democrats and the Republicans. In fact, the Price-Anderson Act that capped that insurance for the last 50 years, they renewed it in 2024. So it was all basically behind the scenes the nuclear industry with the fossil fuel industry setting up, the landscape for, quote, the next nuclear generation. That's what we understand.
Wow, that's very enlightening. And I'm going to let Mark, do you want to add to that? And then we'll move on to some other questions. Yeah, and come back to the nuclear. Yeah.
One of the false pieces of information about nuclear is that it's carbon free, which is not the case. If you look at the life cycle of nuclear power, I mean, it's low carbon, but it's not carbon free. And particularly, there's a lot of carbon that is emitted in the construction phase of the plant, particularly from the cement. And there's also a fair amount of carbon emissions from the mining, the transportation, and the processing of the uranium type of thing. And it's also, basically a lot of scientists still, had this guilt about creating an atomic bomb. And so they've always promoted nuclear. It's never gone away. It's always been fighting. I started fighting nuclear power plant back in 1973 as a student at RPI. It's the exact same issues, exact same people, pushing it. And the first guy I campaigned for was Barry Commoner, who was the world's best known environmentalist when he ran for president. And he used to say, nuclear power, you can use nuclear power in order to boil water, to make steam, to produce electricity. But it makes as much sense as using a chainsaw to cut butter. And, corporations, bankers love nuclear power because the capital investment is so enormous and they make so much money off the interest rates from charging it. It's a scam. It's always been a scam.
I want to just maybe ask one more quick question about nuclear and then move to something to Eric regarding data centers. So, and there's been some discussion in the chat about smaller reactors, quote, being potentially safer, or as Mark was, and you were alluding to, maybe this false pretense of a bridge to fossil fuels, and then someone just wrote, as you mentioned, and how long it takes to build a nuclear reactor, and so you have really all that continued emissions of greenhouse gases. So could you speak to the small nuclear reactor question, and why is that even a question? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just it's just another white elephant. It's basically the small modular reactors, which they were promoted in the 60s and 70s and went nowhere because of the economies of scale. They cost a lot more than the large conventional reactors. And Allison McFarland, a former Nuclear Regulatory Commission chair, 2 years ago, with a group of scientists, did a study of the small modular reactors, SMRs, and they found out that it generates 30% more high-level radioactive waste per unit of electricity than a conventional reactor. There are 170 different designs of SMRs, according to Dr. Joseph Rome and others who've reviewed it. None of them have been licensed or approved. So it's all just, a pipe dream. And the last thing you'd want to do if you wanted to do nuclear, in terms of the economics of it, is to build small reactors. They're just so much more expensive. So that's sort of it. They're just as dangerous inherently as the large reactors, and they cost more.
Interesting. Thank you. And thank you, Eric, for dropping that. I'm collecting all these links and PDFs that we'll send out. Eric, if I can turn to you, and thank you, Eric. I'm going to be very honest. What is a data center, Eric? I just, if you can go back, it seems that no one had heard of data centers until about a year ago. And it's not like we just started using the internet and AI this year. We understand that there's a boom. But if you can give folks a little bit of a big picture,
I'll tell you,
why did they just pop up in conversation?
I'll tell you a story that I think is rather interesting. It's actually about a Bitcoin mining facility up in Buffalo, which is basically it's a building jam packed with computers. And this was a tour of this Bitcoin mining facility taken by a local state senator and his staff. It was the middle of winter. And as you're probably painfully aware, the middle of winter in Buffalo is immensely, immensely, immensely cold. So they walked into this facility, all wearing their coats and their mufflers and their hats and their jackets and their scarves because it was bitter cold. It was, middle of winter in Buffalo. The moment they walked in, they started shedding their clothes. It was boiling hot in there.
Mm-hmm.
It was it's a warehouse full of computers running 24/7, giving off painful amounts of heat. It's using just so much energy, so much water to cool. I mean, maybe on the outside, I've seen data centers. They look relatively innocuous. They're not, I've seen nuclear power plants. I've seen coal-fired power plants. I've seen incinerators. Those are rather scary looking. On the outside, these just look like a warehouse. But when you walk inside, you just see thousands of computers running 24/7. And by the way, the aspiration of the industry, one of the things we're up against, and unfortunately is often the case, is that, the building trades. They like to build things. And, to be honest, sometimes we denigrate these jobs as being temporary. And their response is, yeah, that's the nature of you build something, and then you have to build something else. All building, they're all construction jobs are temporary. But the reality is the aspiration in the industry is to run what I think they call them lights out operations, meaning that they're just no staff at all. Once it's built, maybe someone comes in every couple of weeks to, sweep the floors or whatever. But, the aspiration is to not have any jobs on site whatsoever, to just have them be, literally lights out all the time.
And enormous amounts of electronic waste.
Massive amounts of electronic waste, massive amounts of waste, water used to cool the facility. Folks may know a wonderful, wonderful ally, Yvonne Taylor, Seneca Lake Guardian. One of their concerns is the ecological impacts of this Bitcoin mining facility on the ecology of the lake. It's just discharging massive amounts of heated water that's, killing off life in the lake.
And the follow-up to that is, did we miss something for a while? Because we're on technology right now that is somewhere using, computers to stream this. We're over Zoom. So have data centers been popping up for much more time than we?
The scale is just, look. Like many of us, a year ago, I don't think I'd ever heard of a data center. This is, and look, that's one of the reasons why we're calling for this moratorium. We're pressing the pause button. Because there's a number of bills that have been introduced that here in New York that take a stab, I think perhaps a well-meaning stab, at addressing the consequences, the impacts of data centers. Are they adequate? Are they sufficient? I don't think anybody has a clue. We actually suspect and hope that legislators will embrace this opportunity to press the pause button because, look, if it's life, right? If you have a problem, a thorny problem, wouldn't you want the opportunity to say, "Hey, I'll deal with that in 3 years," and let the state thoroughly analyze what the consequences and the impacts are, and come up with proposed remedies? This is an out. This is an out for legislators. It's a wonderful out, and they should embrace it, and we hope they do.
And lastly, on data centers, Eric, you touched on it, and I'm learning that in addition to all of the things you mentioned, there seems to be both use of the water extensively, but also polluting of the water. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that in New York State, any specific data or information we have about harming our water local to data centers.
The short answer is no. There's some information that our research team, I think, is starting to look into PFAS use.
Okay.
I don't have that information off the top of my head, but I know there's and others might, but there's more information coming out about the use of PFAS in data centers. I think from Europe actually, but our research team is looking into that.
Okay. Gonna turn to you, Mark. You talked about what is commonly referred to as the CLCPA, or the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act of 2019. It was really lauded as a landmark climate change bill. I know you have some.
Not by the Green Party.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying in a.
Or Food and Water Watch.
Maybe I'm saying in quotes, lauded as this landmark piece of legislation. And you've highlighted for us that maybe not only was it maybe not so landmark, but we're already rolling it back. Can you take a step back? What is the big picture? What was the CLCPA? What were its main features? Maybe, if anything, what was, again, good in it? And again, where was it already lacking? And talk a little bit more about that.
When my wife worked for Governor Pattison as the Deputy Secretary for the Environment, she helped write an executive order on climate. And it set up some goals. Actually started in 2002, I believe. You had George Pataki, Republican, setting up goals to develop renewable energy in New York State. And so in 2009, they put out this basically the mainstream position on climate, trying to move to sort of net zero emissions by 2050. And immediately after they introduced the executive order, a bill was introduced in the state assembly and passed every single year. At that point, the state Senate was controlled by the Republicans, who had passed in the Democrats in the assembly, but not in the Senate. And when that changed 10 years later, they finally were able to pass the bill. And so it set some goals on how fast would the state move to renewable energy for electricity, and how fast would it reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Some of you may remember that in 2010, during the gubernatorial campaign of the Green Party, Howie Hawkins, and I was his campaign manager, wrote the Green New Deal, which frankly we stole from the Greens in Europe. But we set up a 10-year timeline to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to zero within 10 years and get 100% renewable energy. Plus, we combined it with an economic bill of rights. So we, along with Food and Water Watch and 200 other groups, wrote the Off Fossil Fuels Act to basically put that into law. And it was basically a big fight. Are we going to set the goals targeted at 2030 or 2050? And my wife, who wrote the 2009 executive order on which the CLCPA was based upon, having gotten a little bit more politically sophisticated, said, you boys should not be arguing about 10 years or 30 years timeline, because for politicians, 10 years or 30 years is an abstract, meaningless term. They only look at their next re-election cycle. You need to focus on what are they going to do in 2 years and 3 years type of thing. So we did write a little bit more on the 2 years or the 3 years. This bill was also based on trying to keep global warming at 2 degrees Celsius. And that was what Al Gore was pushing. That was what Andrew Cuomo was pushing. And Al Gore and whoever the president was at that point, Obama, went to Paris and pushed the 2% to 2 degree thing. And the developing countries said, no, we will not survive 2 degrees. We want 1.5 degrees. And so one of the arguments we made is that at least the CLPA should be updated to reflect what was agreed to in Paris. could not get the climate groups to agree to it. Cuomo actually put in stronger goals on climate action than what the climate groups were proposing. He particularly put in goals, I think it was 9 gigawatts of offshore wind. And, one of the things after the 2014 presidential election, gubernatorial election, was the Greens had a series of meetings with the governor's people. One meeting he attended in, and at that meeting they discussed offshore wind. And he said, well, listen, we can't do offshore wind because, the Kennedys opposed it and Hyannisport impacts the viewshed, and those people in Southampton aren't going to support it. And the Green Party in the room said, well, now we're building offshore wind 10 to 12 miles out, and so it's not so visible. And he turned to Basil Sagos, head of DEC commissioner, and said, well, the Green Party telling the truth. And he said, yes, they're correct. They're further out now. And he said, well, maybe we should do some offshore wind as a pilot program and try to do that. So he pushed it harder on wind. I think he did a little bit harder on distributed solar energy. And he also did energy conservation or energy efficiency type issues. So he did put a couple of things in there. Was it better than most of the other climate laws that existed in the United States at that point? Yes. Was it substantially weaker than what we had drafted? Yes. And I told some of the media that I literally cried when the CLCPA was passed, because to me, it was a sign we were going to lose the fight over climate change, and that people basically focus on trying to get more money for environmental justice communities, which we totally support, and try to get, strict labor standards, which we support and Cuomo killed, but they weren't willing to fight for the real climate policy agenda that was needed. And I said, if they make those type of political compromises here in New York State, we're never going to win this fight. And here we are 6 years later, and Hochul has sold us out. And the legislature went along with it. They complained about it, but ultimately they agreed to do it.
I want to say two quick things. First of all, I want to acknowledge, I said at the outset that organizing is all about relationships, and the people here on this call are amongst our most valuable partners. We've been joined by, I see Manager Joe Green here, who's another legendary activist and ally. And I want to, if I was wearing my hat, Ann, I tip my hat to Manager Joe. I'm not wearing my hat, so I'm just going to pretend to tip my hat. I do want to say to Mark's point, it's true that Hochul has essentially, forced the hand of the legislature into voting on a budget that severely, guts the climate law. But they're furious about it. They are furious about it.
That's
and I think that's an opening for us, for Ann, for Food and Water Watch, for all of us to push our agenda. And by the way, some of these legislators are retiring. True. And we're going to be able to say to them, do you want your last, climate vote, your last environmental vote to be gutting the climate law, or do you want to vote to, halt nuclear power? Do you want it to pause, data centers? So that's something that we should be saying to Deborah Glick, who's the chair of the Environment Committee, to Senator Gianaris, who's also retiring. Yeah. We should be saying to all of them, what do you want your legacy to be? Do you want to be gutting the climate law, or do you want to be protecting our health communities environment? And I think, I'm somewhat hesitant sometimes to use that kind of personal appeal, but I think for some of these folks, it will resonate.
That's perfect, Eric. That's perfect.
I was just going to add that when the CLPA was passed, I also said, I know that the Green Party will be one of the people that will fight to defend it, because I know they're going to sell us out on it. We knew right from the start that we would have to fight to defend a weak bill.
Mark, I will tell you, just about every other day, I say to my colleagues in Food and Water Watch, it's weird that we're working so hard to defend this law.
Yes.
Well, guys, I have to say, because I've worked for 45 years on state and federal Superfund, that was the toxic waste crisis of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s is what is similar to the climate crisis of today. And what we learned when we passed state Superfund in New York State in 82, no funding, no annual plan of action. Okay, 85, we tried with a tiny fee, not enough money. 86, $1.2 billion bond act, 10-year plan in the statute, clean up 800 sites in 10 years. It succeeded, and it succeeded every 10 years. You had funding, you had annual benchmarks, could hold DEC's feet to the fire. They had to go after polluters, etc. In 2019, the CLCPA had no budget. It still has no budget. It's estimated at 10 billion, but that's like a 2016 estimate, probably a lot more than 10 billion to transition to renewable energy. And it has no annual plan of action. Right. So the governor tells NYPA and DEC and NYSERDA, oh, we're going to put a pause on solar investments, et cetera. We need those two key pieces added to the CLCPA. And it's both on the legislature and the governor that they haven't done that. And they know damn well in 2019. I talked to some lobbyists who were part of it back then. They knew damn well they weren't that serious about it because they didn't pass it with a budget.
Right. I mean, the bill that we drafted had a much stronger planning process, 1 year rather than 3 years, and also had the short-term things to it. And it also required every county and every municipality of a population of at least 50,000 to also do their own climate plan. We knew it couldn't just be at the state level. We needed to get the local governments involved as well, and unfortunately, that was defeated.
Wow.
And the plan took them 3 years to write. The plan was basically written by the governor. We spent a lot of time submitting comments, had very little impact. And then, according to the law, that plan was supposed to inform the recent state energy master plan, and they just totally ignore it. And a friend of mine who helped write, because the 2009 executive order also had a climate action plan attached to it, and she helped write that plan. And she said one of the things you really need to do is put an enforcement mechanism into place. Right. And that has made California much better in that people were able to enforce the state climate law. And that was one of the things that was stripped out of both our plan and also the CLCPA, was the ability for the public to enforce the law against the governor.
Yeah, I just to wrap up, I want to echo Eric in terms of in the short term, we have a chance in the next 3 weeks to pass the Nuclear Moratorium Act and the Database Center Moratorium Act. And I think the legacy angle is right on, Eric. And I want to just urge all of you to spend like an hour a week to help us realize these two bills, passing them into law.
And I'm going to throw in the third bill, which is the Package and Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act, which has died literally at the midnight hour the last 2 years in the State Assembly. They were supposed to conference it tomorrow in the Democratic, but they now has postponed it because they're going to conference the budget tomorrow rather than package it. But
so I have the real, I have the real tough job of trying to stop this amazing conversation. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Mark.
We're just a bunch of old fogies,
Not at all. I've been very inspired by this. It's been very informative. I am going to drop a bunch of links in the chat. So if you can stay on a moment, I'm going to highlight some of the things that folks have mentioned here. I'm going to drop a link to the Green New Deal and the specifics of that legislation and plan that Mark Dunlea was part of building and mentioned. I'm going to make sure that you're following Mark on his amazing platform. And he's always writing really informative informative articles that I'm helping me keep aware of what's happening in New York. Eric talked about amazing in-person actions with Food and Water Watch, Albany Lobby Day next week, May 28th, Hopewell Junction action on Thursday this week, the 21st. Also next week in Orangetown, an action to push back against the Orangeburg data center. So I'm going to drop those in the chat. And again, everybody that's on here, I'm going to do a quick email follow-up. And then when we download the whole talk, if you want to share it with others, we'll send that out as well. I know we're running up against time, but again, you're going to get the link. Please, please, tonight, click on this, sign these petitions, join one of the actions. This is the Food and Water Watch moratorium on data centers. As Ann mentioned, you can reach out to Ann directly, Ann Rabe, ANNERABE at msn.com. They have local meetings with the Alliance for Nuclear Free New York, Zoom meetings and local actions. And obviously, we want folks to sign on, as Ann said, and also the moratorium on nuclear in New York. Quick announcements moving forward. Check out the National Green Party of New York webpage. There is a national meeting taking place in July 23rd to 26th in Chicago. This is the first time we've had an in-person meeting in a few years. If you're not already following us, please go to our link tree. We're on Instagram, Facebook, X/Twitter, and our Green Party of New York website to keep up on similar events like this. And once again, our organization runs primarily on donations from people like you, and we want to continue to bring you this kind of content and organize together. So if you can make any donation in light of this amazing talk, that would be absolutely fantastic and greatly appreciated. And there's a few ways to donate. So I'm going to drop some of those in the chat. It's a bunch of links. But again, they will all be sent out by tomorrow morning. And thank you for our speakers. Again, really, really appreciate the three of you. We're really privileged to have your expertise and your inspiration.